So welcome to all the viewers of Objetivismo Brasil. Today we have Aaron Smith. Aaron Smith is an instructor and fellow at the Iran Institute. He received his PhD in philosophy from Johns Hopkins University. And today the topic we'll be discussing is Stoicism. So thanks for being here with us, Aaron, Ricardo.
My pleasure.
Hi, Matheus. Hi, Aaron. So we're talking about Stoicism today. So let's start with the basics. What is Stoicism?
We could even start with why talk about Stoicism, but yeah, let's talk about both of those. Why don't we talk about both of those? So Stoicism is one of the major philosophies of the ancient Greek period. It was originated around 300 BC. So this is during the period right after the classical period in ancient Greece, which is the period with Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. I'm sure most people have heard of those names in one form or other. They're famous major philosophers. And following the death of Aristotle in 322 BC, about 20 years after that, the founder of Stoicism, he's a merchant from Cyprus named Zeno of Citium, as he's called, not Zeno the paradox guy. Zeno of Citium founded the philosophy of Stoicism, and it flourished for about 600 years, which is interesting. So it's roughly 3rd century BC to 3rd century AD. So it's had a long life in the ancient Greek world, and there have been various kinds of revivals of Stoicism over time. In the Renaissance, there was a bit of a revival of Stoicism, kind of neo-Stoicism, whatever you want to call it. And, also nowadays, of course, we've got the modern Stoic movement. We have kind of entrepreneurs and influencers, people like Tim Ferriss and Ryan Holiday are kind of promoting Stoicism as a kind of a life hack. But there's also just more in the 80s and 90s, there was starting to be a lot more scholarship, like academic, serious work on the Stoics, just in universities and so on. And a lot of quality work has been coming out, like historically. So it's, in a way, in fact, it's sort of seen a revival today. I wouldn't exactly say that Stoicism as a systematic philosophy is getting a revival today. It's more that people are looking back to Stoicism for tips, advice, perspective, largely on, I think, on managing life's troubles, helping people cope with adversity, difficulties, stress, anxiety, pain. So a lot of the self-help related stuff that people are getting out of Stoicism is largely focused on, like, I'll call it pain management. I don't mean like medically, but, coping with adversity, and also to try to have a kind of perspective on life that can help you navigate adversity with some kind of resilience and strength and so on. So that's largely what people are getting out of today, but it was much more than that in the ancient Greek world.
So let's go back to the ancient Greek world. And, in the beginning of philosophy, like the first 300 years, a lot of the development of philosophy were one guy answering another guy. And then, in a sense, philosophies, they developed as, well, this guy raised a problem and I disagree with his solution. Here's my take on the problem. Now I have a school of philosophy. And then, 100 years later, some new people come along and they say, hang on a second, those guys were wrong. Here's our take on this. And so what is the context that Stoicism enters this, let's say this train of thought of formulating problems and trying to understand life better?
Okay, so let's see how we can do this quickly. Socrates, as a philosopher in ancient Greece, really got people thinking a lot about what it means to live a virtuous life, what it means to take virtue and the state of your soul or your character as a really serious endeavor, like you really take that seriously and to be virtuous. And he started getting people thinking about where do we even get these concepts, things like justice and virtue and knowledge? And what he started to realize is we operate with these concepts all the time. We use them, we employ them, we call things just and unjust, but we don't really have much of a secure view about what justice is and what some of other virtues like wisdom or moderation or whatever, courage. And so he started the ball rolling, in effect, for thinking about where do our concepts come from? What do they refer to in reality? And what virtues should we actually be following and why? And one of his, I wouldn't quite call him a student, but associates, young associates, his name was Plato, he eventually formulated a whole systematic philosophy, which Socrates did not. And it's a very sort of dualistic philosophy. So, and I'll say what I mean by that. It's in effect that you've got true reality, what really and fully exists, what's really and fully real, is something separated from the world we see around us with our senses, the tables and chairs and stuff. And including the virtues. What in effect the virtues are is something separate from the world. And you get this dualistic view where man, in effect, each individual is sort of divided into parts. You have this spiritual part, the soul, whose true home is in the other dimension, right? It's very, very good, in effect, a little religious. But it's trapped in a body, so it has to cope with, sexual urges and a need for money and food and things like that. And the whole goal is to escape the body and to get the soul in a pure state off alone. Now, there's much, much more to say about Plato's philosophy, but that's a hint in the direction of Stoicism. And then you have Plato's student, Aristotle. And he was very influenced by Plato, but also had a very different worldview. So his view is there is no other dimension. The objects of knowledge are right here in this world. We can come to know them by exercising our sense perception and reasoning and logic and so on. It's the world of science. It's the world of nature. It's the world of science. Life is in this world. Happiness is in this world. Virtue is in this world. And a human being should focus on developing his life and his character so he can get the values he needs and the character he needs to be happy and to flourish. So much more this worldly, whereas Plato's a little more otherworldly, Aristotle's more this worldly. When it comes to Stoicism, I'll say something about Zeno. So Zeno, poor Zeno, he was a wealthy merchant and he was on his way to Athens and he got shipwrecked. He survived it and wound up in Athens and studied philosophy for a time with different people, but he was very influenced by this guy named Crates, who was within the Cynic school of philosophy. And this is where you get into the roots of Stoicism. Because what the Cynics taught was that virtue is the only good. It's the only good. Not life, not love, not a good dinner, not a satisfying career. Virtue is the only good. And vice, moral evil, in effect. Vice is the only bad. And they also taught that virtue is sufficient for happiness. So as long as you've got a virtuous character, you've got your internal character all set, in what they think of as virtuous, that it's sufficient for happiness. It's all you need. Yeah, you could have your leg cut off, but you can still be happy. You can lose everything. You can lose your home, your family. They're killed, like, the story of Job in the Bible, right? God just wrecks the guy's life. And it's like, that can happen to you and you can be happy, according to the Cynics, because all you need is virtue. That's not something Aristotle would have accepted. He explicitly rejected that. But Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, was very much influenced by that. I mean, he made a tweak to this saying, well, yeah, so virtue is the only thing truly and genuinely good. But there are some things like health, wealth, beauty. They're sort of values, I mean, we naturally prefer these to their opposites, right? So it's sort of okay. It's okay to pursue them, but just don't get attached to them. You don't think they're that important, because in the end, they're really not important. All that's important is your character. So whether you have them or don't have them, whether you live or die, Whether you find love or you lose love or never find it, in the end, these things don't matter. And so what it taught people to do was to reorient their way of valuing, to get away from thinking that, I mean, here I am, I just got a new laptop. I love this thing. But I don't think of that as value. Or you can value it, I guess, but don't be attached to it. Don't think it's very important. And if your moral duty requires you to give it up without a thought. If you dump water on it accidentally or something happens to it, don't be upset. Literally, don't be upset. It's irrational to be upset. It's contrary to morality to be upset. Because what have you just done? You've implicitly thought, this is a value. I've suffered a loss. No, you haven't. From their perspective, the only way you can suffer a loss is if you do something immoral, and the only way you can gain truly is by improving your character. So there's a real what would you call it? A turn to the inside, a turn toward the internal state of one's character as one sort of inner citadel, where you can. I mean, the sort of the value that they hold out to you, the prospect of life that they hold out to you is you can be virtually invulnerable from suffering. Because your character, they think, though I think contradictorily, but set that aside for a second, your character, they think, is under your control. The state of your moral character is under your control. Nothing else is. So you have your judgment, and as a result, the state of your character, that's up to you, under your control. Everything else is under the hands of fate, so to speak. Right. And so it's you can orient yourself toward an inner virtue. External things, try not to care too much about them.
Right. So I have a few questions on that. So when you say that the only thing that is under your control, so according to the Stoic view, the only thing that is under your control, like there's a sense in which the only thing that is 100% under your control is your character, right? Like what you're doing. Because I'm just trying to understand your view. Because you can't control whether or not it's going to rain tomorrow. Like say, let me give you a simple example. Say you build a sand castle on the beach, and then it starts raining. It's like you have no control over whether or not it's going to rain, and it destroys the thing that you were building. Or even if it's like a house and then a tornado comes by and so on. So is it in that sense that that catastrophes can happen? Or maybe, maybe Billy comes by and kicks my sandcastle or something, or a different tribe comes by and destroys my house. Is that the sense that they mean?
It's more than that. So there is a perfectly sensible and rational way in which you could hold the idea that some things are up to us, others aren't. Don't fuss too much about the things you have absolutely no control over. Kind of in the way that you said. I mean, if you're out to build a sandcastle, and that's a value to you, it's important to you artistically or just for recreation, or your kids like it, it's fun to help build and stuff. You're trying to produce a value. Now, you may take the perspective that, yeah, it might rain today and, it might go away or kind of mess up our time. And, this is a rational perspective in which I'm not going to let that ruin my day. I'm not going to let that frustrate me too much. But their attitude is way more stark than that, way more extreme. Because what Epictetus tells us, Epictetus is one of the later Stoics from the Roman imperial period. And he says, whenever you tuck your kid in at night and you give them a kiss or whatever, remind yourself that they're going to die. And you have to train yourself to get to the point where, just as, so I've got this coffee cup. If this slipped off the table and broke, I tell myself, have I suffered a loss? No, I broke a cup. It's like spilt milk, as the expression is in English. It's spilt milk. It's like it's not a big deal. It's a minor thing. It happens, whatever, not a big deal. You have to get to that point with your kid. So when your kid dies, although it might be natural for you to shed a tear, it's irrational, though, on his view. It's irrational to grieve, even though it's natural, because you haven't really suffered a loss. So it's having that view where you can get your how would you put this? You get into a mental state or a mental set where you can have this, your child dies and you think basically spilt milk. And there might be some automatic emotional response just because we're human beings, for Christ's sake, to feel an emotional pang. But then you have to pull that back, use your mind to pull that back and say, no. You think you've suffered a loss, and that's why you're experiencing a feeling of sadness. You haven't suffered a loss. But you can suffer a real, genuine loss is if you let your emotions, in effect, tell you that you've suffered a loss, and you haven't. You're getting your values wrong. So if you think about all the major things in life, whether it's loved ones or your career or your life, I mean, literally your life, to treat those as spilt milk. That's really the perspective they're trying to get you to come around to, because if you're in that state, their view is you'll be, in effect, invulnerable. They don't mean literally invulnerable, but basically invulnerable to the slings and arrows, as Hamlet would put it, all the adversity in life. So it's not just like, look, I love my kid, he loves the sand castles, let's build it. Maybe it rains, whatever, but at least we've built it and had fun with my kid, and I'm trying to go out there and enjoy my values, because I think those are real values. They're genuine values. My child is a genuine value. The sandcastle and my kid's enjoyment of is a genuine value. I want to embrace values. I want to go after them. I want to build them. I want to get all the kinds of values I can out of life. And their attitude is, well, you want to build a sandcastle, fine. But if you lose your kid, spilt milk. If it rains, spilt milk.
Right. So it's not an anti-value philosophy, as maybe Schopenhauer is like maybe a little bit more anti-value, but it's not pro-value either. We can think of like as objectivism as like, the philosophy will tell you like to pursue values to live your life, like pursue your happiness. Like Aristotle just put in the era, which are like to pursue your happiness as the end of your life, end as the purpose. But Stoicism it's not telling you either. It's not that values don't exist or that values are not possible, but it's like pursue your values, but with how would you put it? With a step back, like don't entirely commit to them. Would that be a fair description?
Well, they do it. They have a term for value, which things like, a new haircut or something, food. I'll put just things that are so straightforward: food, shelter, clothing, friends. Right? They have a term for that, but it's the way they. Okay, I'll get just a little technical here, and then we'll step back out, because I think there is a sense in which it's anti-value. But they think our basic conception of the good and the bad, right, comes from nature. So that living organisms naturally try to maintain their own existence. They relish in food and they pull back from pain, So your basic orientation to what we would call values, your basic value orientation is given to you by nature. And they give all sorts of examples of things like this. The young cow, the male cow, right? He kind of butts with his head, even though he doesn't have horns yet. He's sort of oriented toward his own constitution, toward his own body, toward its needs in some very basic way. But then the Stoics say that's not enough, though. So that's where it starts, and it's sort of given by nature. But that's not enough. So once you come to the age of reason, where you can actually think, you can start thinking, well, I need more than this, right? I mean, just think about it. You come out and you think, okay, you'll suckle to get your milk, and maybe you'll pull back if somebody sticks you with a pin, but that doesn't give you life guidance, really. It doesn't give you a moral standard. because some things hurt, but they're good for you, and some things feel good, but they're bad for you. So that, you need to use reason. But then what they tell you to do is then first you have to find out what is human nature. You have to learn rationally. You have to kind of come to a viewpoint about this is human nature. This is how human being, this is what we are, including this is how we reach knowledge. This is the nature of the world that I live in. And then how do I fit into that? And that's when they start to think, well, and then they have a whole view is the whole world is structured and infused by and governed by God. So the universe for them is like, it's like a living organism with God as its sole and animating part or principle that runs through everything in one form or other. It's in everything. And it's responsible for the causal structure in the world, for the logical development of, say, like a seed to a flower and a human being to an adult. And it's the animating, active principle that infuses everything. So everything's infused by God, governed by God. Your reason, on the Stoic view, is actually a fragment or a part of God's nature within you. And so their view was, if that's the nature of man, and this is the nature of the universe, the good and the right is to live in accordance with nature, which means to live in accordance with the deity, to live in accordance with however things fall out. So whatever fate brings, fate/God, whatever that brings, whatever happens, is in effect divinely intended and good. And so if you're born crippled, embrace that. Not, play your part in the divine play, so to speak. If you are born into a family that's politically connected, play that role. And so everybody has a part in a sort of a divine play. In effect, they don't exactly put it like that. That's me, but it's to live in accordance with nature means something like that. To comply with, adhere to, not resent or object to or complain about what happens. My wife gets killed in a car accident. You have to regard that as what? Divinely ordained. This is the way fate/God makes things happen. To resent it would be impious. To resent it would be wrong, because after all, things happen for the best, according to this philosophy. And to really grieve about it is to be irrational, because what you're saying is you've suffered a loss. You've lost a good, and you haven't, according to the Stoic view. So it's hardcore, but it's in that sense, there's a real sense in which it's anti-value. So I want to say one thing here is that although they allow things to, like, okay, if you want to have food and you want to be healthy, okay, it's natural to go after those kinds of things. It's okay, even though they're not genuine goods. But this I think is just a contradiction within the Stoic viewpoint, because they can't fully say, don't care about anything whatsoever, nothing at all, except your character. That's a little too crazy. Who's going to accept that? And yet they can't say, embrace life. Really work to get that new position or that promotion you've been working for years. Really get it and love it. Be happy you got it. Really take seriously the pursuit of romantic values in life. Like, don't just sit around and think, well, I've got my character is such that I'm not crossing any lines or whatever, and I've got everything I need. No, go after, better your life by grab a lot of those values, so to speak. Go find them, achieve them. It can't say that either, because it says the only good's your character and all these things you can't control, and then you can lose them. And then if you think, and then it makes your life more precarious, because what if your wife gets hit by a car? Or what if you don't get that job? And it's a real reversion away, I think, from the external world, the world of material goods, the world of what objectivism would think of as real values, and a retreat inward. I just get my moral character in the right state, I can be right with the world. I can have everything I need, no matter what else. And yeah.
So what is so can you say something about the objectivist view of values? Because Ayn Rand talks about the fact that man has a nature, and what values are to us, well, depends on our nature. Like I can't have poison as a value to me because that will kill me. So what does it look like? So what's this connection between man's nature and values in objectivism? And what does it look like to pursue values in objectivism in a way that is not just the development of my character?
Because, so I mean, objectivism would agree with the idea that there is some level of abstraction at which you could say objectivism agrees that you should live in accordance with nature, right? Because if you live in contradiction to nature, in contradiction to the nature of the universe, in contradiction to your own human nature, in contradiction to the nature of reason, in contradiction to the nature of the objects you have to deal with, you'd set yourself up for failure. So at some level of abstraction, sure. But then a lot depends on what is the nature of nature? And what is human nature? And what is the nature of reason? And what is the nature of values? And you can answer those questions in all sorts of different ways. And so the similarity then just becomes kind of meaningless. If I say follow the good, and you think the good means, wipe out race X, and I think the good means pursuing your life in a rational way, you can say, well, both agree with pursuing the goods. There's a similarity. It's like, well, that doesn't go for it very far. So objectivism, unlike Stoicism, roots values in the nature and the requirements of human life. So the whole reason the issue of values, the things that are good, the things that are bad, the things that you want to go after, the things you want to avoid, the only reason that comes up in life in general is because human beings are living organisms. So we face a constant alternative throughout our lives between life and death, pleasure and pain, joy and suffering, and these are just aspects of life and death. And what you want to do is find the things that actually sustain and advance your life, and then avoid, shun, maybe condemn the things that hinder, damage, destroy life. And so when you're trying to think about what's a rational value orientation is, think about the things that actually sustain and advance your life and work to achieve them. Have a lot of them in your life, right? I save a lot of time. I'm more productive because of I have computing technology. I mean, I got a laptop, I got a smartphone, and just this helps me be more productive. And being productive like that helps me earn a salary, which helps me sustain my life, which helps me save a lot of time. I can buy a car, right? Because I can get from point A to point B pretty quickly, not 3 months, but I can get there in an hour. It does also, and I think I can afford like medical care. You think all of these things that mean something to your life. It's find the things that advance and sustain your life, and go after them, pursue them, attain them, enjoy them, keep them, right? And whereas from the Stoic perspective, no, life is not the standard of value. Nature's ordering is the standard of value. So the way nature/God has set things up, you look to that, and you think of yourself as having a duty to adhere to whatever you can sort of read off of nature as demanding of you. And how they think about this, again, it goes back to the idea it's accommodation with God's will, in effect, and getting your character in a state that sustains and supports that. Fit into the world, into the place where God has fitted you, in effect, and don't complain. I mean, much more than this kind of thing. I think that's the way to sort of distill it.
Yeah, this sounds a little bit like, I'm just making a reference or a comparison to Plato. That Plato will say something somewhat similar in the sense that, well, you are a certain kind of person and you fit in society in a certain kind of way. Like the best, the way you can be the most useful or you can help the group the most is by playing your role. What you're saying about Stoicism sounds a lot like it, with the Difference being there's no like state like ordering me around. So let me just put it this way, and I want to hear what you have to say about this. It sounds like, back in the days, that Stoicism would be like an individualist philosophy, because it doesn't have like the whole state apparatus imposing all this stuff on me. Yeah, it has this like nature apparatus, but that's natural. That's just the way the world is. So what would you say to that?
Well, I would not say that Stoicism is an individualistic philosophy, precisely because the role of individualism is based on the idea that each individual is an end in himself, not a part, a fragment, a servant of some wider whole, whether it's a community or it's the universe or whatever. As Ayn Rand liked to put it, man is not a coral bush. With this, it's not like you have separate living organisms, you just have a cluster of stuff. And so the Stoics thought you had a duty or an obligation to serve the good of the whole, of which you are a part. If you think playing your role in a grand play, suppose you're an actor, right? And you're in a play and you have a role and you come in Act 2, Scene 5, and you have a role to play. And the success of the play as a whole depends on you playing that role as you're supposed to play it. And if you say, you know what, I'm not going to say my lines, I'm going to make up my own thing, and I'm going to come in Act 4, I'm going to change, you'll make a mess of the whole. And that's so it's more of a duty perspective to a whole. It's more about subverting the private to the collective. But they think about that in more cosmic terms versus social terms, though they do think about it in social terms. I mean, Marcus Aurelius definitely thinks that you have a duty and obligation to the whole. And he says, if you think of yourself, he's probably thinking about a battlefield analogy. If you think about a hand or a head severed, away from the whole of the body, that's what someone is like who isolates himself off from the community and his obligations to the community. And there's not a lot of surviving work about Stoic politics. The Stoics did think one should be engaged in politics, but so we have fragments, bits and pieces, reports. When I say fragments, I don't mean a little piece of papyrus like floating around and somebody picks it. I mean fragments is the technical term for reports by other authors. Like if I write a book and it says Ricardo Burke told me that he believes in God or something like that, it's like, okay, and then that gets passed on and somehow it's a report. So we have a bunch of reports in different authors of what Zeno said in a work he called Republic. Because Plato, as you mentioned, wrote a work called The Republic. Well, Zeno wrote a Republic, as did Cicero. He's not a Stoic, but he was really important for preserving a lot of Stoic doctrine and like very clearly articulating it. But that's more of like a communal living. So it's not some grand state apparatus. It's more like communal living. But one thing that the Stoics did not do, which Plato did, the Stoics did not say, well, there's just a few, the creme de la creme, the philosopher kings, who are the only people who know the true and the good, and then they sort of rule over everybody else. I don't think there's any kind of distinction like that in Stoicism. Yeah, though I haven't looked at the fragments from Zeno's Republic in some time, but even then that might be also more oriented to a community of philosophers, though. We're being recorded, so I can't exactly say, don't quote me on that, but I'll just say with the caveat, I'd have to look back at that. But
yeah. Earlier, you mentioned about the 6 centuries where the philosophy of Stoicism was the most relevant, that probably dominated the scene. How does that fit with Christianity?
Yeah,
I mean,
good.
Is that a relationship?
Point.
I mean, we discussed some parts here, but I think.
Yeah. So let me correct something. So the Stoicism as an active school of thought lasted for like something like 600 years, 3rd century BC to 3rd century AD. but it wasn't the dominant philosophy of that whole time. For parts of the Hellenistic philosophy, it was period. It was, and certainly I think the Roman imperial period. So this is 31 BC to 476 AD. So we're talking about the beginnings of the empire and then the collapse of the empire. But what's interesting is the connection, I think, between Stoicism and Christianity is you get a movement more and more toward an orientation to the divine and to orienting our lives and accommodating ourselves to what we think of as divine. And it's more of an inward retreat, I think, into the soul. And I think that really helped pave the way, I think, for Christianity. I mean, if you think about the late writers in Stoicism, the writers of the Roman imperial period, like Epictetus, he was embraced by many Christians, even in monasteries. I mean, people would read Epictetus because it resonated with them. This sounds kind of like Christianity. It's welcome with gladness everything that comes from fate/God. Know that the universe has a God, that it's controlled by God, that it's oriented for the best by God, and that the one thing to avoid is sin, vice. And don't worry about external things, material goods, ask not, whether, don't worry about where your food's going to come from, whether you're clothed. It's that kind of thing. It's that it was a transition belt, I think, on the way. You wouldn't have gotten from Aristotle straight to a Christian world where you're thinking about it's about life, happiness, flourishing, and value in this world, scientific orientation. I mean, the first time I read some of Seneca's letters, you really feel like you're reading a Christian author. And it is surprising.
At least here in Brazil, we see with people that consider themselves pro-freedom, a great rise in the adoption of Stoicism in different aspects of their lives. And myself, I've always identified the importance of Stoicism, especially in the context of Marcus Aurelius, in the sense of the war, that we are in a war in different aspects. For example, some days ago we had elections here, so we were inside a war in our professional environment. Many people are at war with their bosses and the conditions in which they are involved. And so for you, why are some aspects of Stoicism so popular today?
Well, when I say I'm going to go back to war, and then I'll talk about the popularity. There is a sense in the later Roman writers, especially. I mean, there's a difference in the early Greek founders of Stoicism were systematic philosophers. I mean, they're talking about everything from the nature of concepts to language to logic, the whole system. I mean, Chrysippus, he was the third head of the Stoic school. He's really the major architect of it as a systematic, integrated philosophic system. And we only have, from all of these people, we only have reports and bits and pieces of fragments. So none of their works actually survived whole. Unlike Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, we have those. And so that's one of the reasons why people turn to them more. It's a richer sort of source of connected material. But in the later writers, there is a real sense that we live in a malevolent universe, as Ayn Rand would put it. It's life's going to knock you down. You're going to suffer. You're in the hands of fate, fortune, fortune is fickle. What you have today, you could lose tomorrow. And in that kind of uncertain world in which you're likely to be hurt and likely to face loss and suffering and anxiety, it's how do you cope with that how do you orient yourself, like psychologically, and orient yourself in terms of what you value, so that you can reach some sort of calm, some sort of, call it tranquility if you want, but peace of mind, a steady state in life where life doesn't have to be suffering, and you can cope with adversity with a kind of strength or resilience or whatever you want to call it. And you get the sense that they're really looking for something like that. I think people are looking for that today. It's there's a feeling, and it's not true of everybody, of course, but there's a feeling that there's so much loss in life. There's so much anxiety, suffering, pain, disappointment, that somehow I have to get to a position where I can be above all that, where I can extract myself from that, so all this kind of stuff doesn't hurt me, or at least reorient my values in such a way that these things don't really bother me anymore. And in that way, I can reduce suffering, reduce anxiety, and have a better life. But I think part of the problem with that is, a major part of the problem of this, what it really fosters. They don't, often modern Stoics people will not want to put it this way, but I think it is in the end what it amounts to is, it promotes a detachment from actual values. Because your wife gets killed in a car accident, you did lose a value. From objectivism's perspective, you're just flat out wrong to think that you didn't lose a good. And that this was something, well, it's like a cup and, it's spilled milk. No, you really lost a significant value that really added to and enhanced your life and enriched your living experience. And you really lost something, and you should grieve, because that's your connection to your values. But you should also experience the joy of what these values bring you while you're living. I don't think life is a foxhole, and you got to just steel yourself against the suffering that from adversity and so on. I think no, but some people experience life that way, or they have that sort of orientation to life, and this resonates with them. This is a way to steel myself in the world as I see it. The objectivism sees the world in a very different way. Not only does the objectivism reject the idea that's coming from Stoicism that this is the best of all possible worlds, because God has governed providentially everything for the best. But that's just false. There isn't any God. Sorry, that's controversial, probably for your audience, but objectivism's view is there is no God. There's just nature. Nature doesn't like you or dislike you. There is no liking or disliking. It's just nature is what it is. But nature is such that if you use your mind and you do identify the values that sustain and support your life, and you find out the methods to achieve them, you can be successful in life. I mean, it's always possible. Tragedy is always possible, right? You just get hit by a bus or struck by lightning, or, whatever. Those are a little flippant, but I mean, you can suffer some kinds of adversity, even if you're a virtuous person, and even if you're following the right, proper, rational methods to achieve real values, things can happen. But that's not the essence of life. Objectivism views the essence of life is not the part that deals with suffering. If you suffer some kind of adversity, okay, find out a way out of it and move forward. It's not about pain. It's not about suffering. It's about living. And I think there's a real sense in Stoicism, particularly the later writers, that, and particularly Marcus Aurelius. And part of this is stemming from their actual philosophy. And I think some of Marcus's views is coming from Marcus. So, I mean, he's a Roman emperor, and he has a lot on his shoulders, including military campaigns. So he might just, as an individual, be more prone to a sort of malevolent universe sort of perspective. But that's certainly not the whole story, because when you read his actual writings, this is coming from the philosophy. And it's derived from this, and partly because there are other elements to the philosophy, just to original Stoicism. It's because the world, according to the Stoics, goes in cycles, ever repeating cycles. So so it collapses into pure fire, which is just pure God, and then it spins back out again, and it becomes the universe again over a vast period of time, of course. And then we're back to doing this podcast again. I'll say the same things. You'll nod just like you are now. Everything's going to repeat. and then it collapses again cyclically and then comes back again. So part of what Marcus is saying is like, what's the point? Like, what's the point of any of this? Just the vanity of existence. It's like the vanity, the insignificance of fame. So what happens if I become the greatest philosopher in the world, and they have a ticker tape parade in New York City, and they give me a private island, and then you're gone, and then it's over, and then oblivion, and then it all repeats again, and it's just, what if I don't do anything with my life? Well, I'm not going to do anything with my life in an infinite number of times. It's like, it's all sort of fixed in advance, and it's just going to repeat, and it's such BS in effect. And yet he tells himself also, yeah, but you have to have a more sort of pious, more benevolent attitude to the universe, because you really have to look at it. This is all coming from God, and it's all from the best. So you get to catch him in better moods, going both ways, because his philosophy tells him, on the one hand, welcome everything as the good from God and be happy about it. And then also, everything is fixed in advance, and you're just playing the part, and you play the role out, and then it goes away and comes back and goes away and comes back, and it seems pointless. And that's because you have a real problem with the philosophy. So it's not just Marcus Aurelius' psyche, though I think that played a role in his, because Epictetus seems more cheerful if you actually read his writing, but it doesn't make the philosophy better.
One of the funny things I told Ricardo the other day is that most of my young friends who considers themselves Stoics, they all do CrossFit. So it's like a CrossFit generation. So they apply the Marcus Aurelius part, and they just forget about philosophy and fill in with whatever they.
Yeah.
They
so
come,
that's why you have to sort of try to separate out between Stoicism as a philosophy, as a worldview, as a perspective on man in the universe, and a perspective on the universe, and modern Stoicism today. So if I bet a lot of those people at the gym, right, trying to get hard, get fit, whatever, they probably don't know anything about, I don't mean that. They probably don't know anything about the details and specifics of ancient Greek Stoicism, what it was really like as a system, what it really demanded of an individual. Like Kierkegaard, I heard said that most Christians aren't Christians because they would not have done what Abraham did. If God says, go kill your only son, they're like, oh, okay, I'll grab a knife and let's go sacrifice him like an animal without question. It's like, yeah, go ahead. You go to church, go chat with people. Like, who's going to do that? And you're not real Christians. And there's a sense in which they're not real Stoics. Stoicism is a really demanding philosophy that asks you to fundamentally reorient your values in a radical way. And it has a radical implication for your view of life and for your view of valuing. And, that's not what's going on today in modern Stoicism. It's, I read something, you can read all sorts of things in Marcus Aurelius that in a certain kind of context are valuable. One of the things you get from him is constantly telling me, why are you so worried about what other people think? Like, that has nothing to do with your character. Who cares if this guy, insults you, calls you a name or something like that? You're not hurt. Like, why are you so concerned about this? Stop being so concerned about this. Be more focused on your own moral character and make sure your actions are right. Like, he may call you a jerk, just make sure you're not a jerk, right? That's the important thing. And if you just take that out of context, like, okay, bye, that's good advice. But then once you place it in the context of the whole, it's what he's signaling there is the only good is your moral character. And you should really extract yourself from concern about other people's opinions, and including whether, they kicked out of a job. Your moral character hasn't been damaged. You haven't suffered a loss. And I'd be like, no way. Somebody undermined me, like viciously undermined me and got me kicked out of a job that's important to me. It's like, yeah, I've lost a value. I can't stand that guy. And he tells you don't be angry. Marcus really tells you don't be angry with people. The only reason people are vicious or are immoral or not good is because they don't understand the good. So you should more pity them and as your fellow brother man, rather than be angry or upset with them. So there is a level of detachment that's involved, which I don't think is healthy. But you can take bits and pieces from Stoicism put it on a more rational foundation and take it as a little tidbit of advice, and yeah, you can get something out of it. But you can do that with anything. You can do it with the Bible. You could just, but that's not how that's not a philosophic way of thinking. And so I think most people that are into Stoicism, and probably most intellectual kind of movements, it's not to just single out Stoicism. If you had a bunch of modern Epicureans or a bunch of modern, who knows what, I don't know, Cartesians or something, I don't know, maybe they wouldn't take that philosophy. They take a bits and pieces from that and find some value in a different context. And but kind of modern Stoicism is kind of like Stoicism, yeah, but we don't have to go to extremes. We don't have to take that seriously. We can sort of nibble at the bits and pieces, and yeah. But part of thinking about a philosophy and having a philosophic perspective on life is that you integrate the pieces into an actual worldview, so you can have an operating system, not just a hack or an app or something.
So how does the development of Stoicism differ from Objectivism? So as you're talking about, like, I mean, Stoicism, went on more successfully for about 600 years, and then it had its comebacks and so on. And there's no, or it doesn't seem to be like an official Stoic position or official Stoic principle. It seems to be a philosophical movement, and the ideas can change a little bit, or they can be adapted based on the circumstances or different eras. How does that differ from Objectivism, as we call it a closed system?
Yeah, a couple things. One is that Objectivism hasn't been around long enough to have a full perspective to answer that question. So if you look at 600 years in effect of Stoicism, there's definitely changes in the system. I think at some periods it really comes across as more religious, more like a religion. In some periods, especially the early periods, it was significantly more systematic, and they were weighing in and formulating views about propositional logic. I mean, all sorts of things that today's sort of Broics, as they call them, are not aware of or interested in. And there was a period, okay, now I forget whether it's Panatius or Posidonius, it's one of the P's, was advocating that the Stoics should get back to a more Platonist view of the soul is divided into three parts. And that was not traditional Stoicism. And then of course the later Stoics are more focused on ethics and metaphysics, I would say, but not technical stuff, just man's place in the world and how we should live. So it definitely had that sweep. And I think the how it comes back in the Renaissance, this is just the rediscovery of Greek texts. They rediscovered Aristotle, they rediscovered all sorts of texts, and they just sort of started processing all this stuff. And so in the Renaissance, you actually had the Epicureans came back, the Stoics came back, the skeptics came back. You had, if you look at Epicureanism, if you've read René Descartes' Meditations, and you've got the objections and replies. And one of the objections, I think it's the fifth set of objections, is coming from Gassendi, a French philosopher named Pierre Gassendi. He's an Epicurean. I mean, at root, he's an Epicurean. And Descartes more of an Augustinian Platonist, in effect, with elements of Stoicism. So you read his work on the passions, and you read his work on knowledge, and you read his stuff on free will. And if you know Stoicism, it really pops out at you. Boy, there's a lot of Stoic viewpoints in here. So they weighed in on philosophic issues in ways that later thinkers would pick up on. But no, going back to the point about is there like an orthodox, so to speak, Stoicism? I mean, in the scholarship, they used to talk more about orthodox Stoicism. And that really means Chrysippus in the end. But I think scholars tend to be moving away a bit from that language to think about that there's really an orthodoxy here. There's just many different heads of the school, and it just takes different turns and stuff. It's fundamentally the same philosophy. I mean, you have to identify, a philosophy's identity is its fundamentals. Its fundamentals in metaphysics and epistemology and ethics. And there are changes at the margins, and some a little more substantial, but the core has remained the same. I mean, it's not like the later Roman people like Epictetus in the Roman imperial period, like, or Marcus Aurelius. It's not that they rejected Chrysippus' system. No, that was the basis. I mean, they all read this stuff, and this is the basis of the philosophic system. It's just our interests currently right now are just more on practical life ethics, how to live. I mean, you can, if you read Epictetus, I mean, he talks about logic and stuff, but just more like, yeah, you can do the logic stuff and it's important and whatever, because you got to figure out what's true, but that's only a means to an end. The end is how to live. And then you just have to think, what do I think about what he's telling me about? This is really how to live. This is really how to face life. Yeah.
So when you talk about that the Stoics had an influence over various philosophers, and that, you know, some of the Stoic ideas come out, one popular author today that has said that life is suffering, popular professor of psychology, so Jordan Peterson. What do you think is his take? I mean, do you think, you know, with this kind of statement, life is suffering, okay, now what are we going to do about it? And then he writes a few books, essentially telling you, like, you know, take responsibility, and it's like atone, right? Put in the language you were using, to atone for the sufferings in life and do the best you can, and like really focus on your character and so on. Do you think there's like an Stoic element in Peterson?
You could put it as that there's a Stoic element in this, or you can just say there's a common perspective. Because it may be that Peterson's never read for example, suppose he never read the Stoics, but yeah, you could have that kind of worldview though. You could have the view that life is suffering, and you have to find a way to find strength in some way, to work, be a man, so to speak, and work through it, and make your bed, and just find a way to have some strength or resilience in the face of this. Yeah, you could have that without being a Stoic, but there's certainly a commonality, I think, in that. And again, it's just worth stressing. Objectivism does not view the world like that. It's so radically opposite. Like objectivism, life is suffering. It's life is the pursuit and the enjoyment of values. If you think about what life literally is, the whole process of living is a process of pursuing, achieving, using / enjoying values. I mean, that is actually literally the essence of what living is. That's what life's about. And the world is not structured in such a way as that you're sort of doomed to fail, doomed to suffer. And you have to think about how much exactly you want to put on the Stoics for that, but I think there's definitely a heavy element of that. Because it's not about the ambitious pursuit of values for life. It's about accommodation to the divine will, to fate, and be humble in the face of that, and be happy with what life gives you.
Right. So
that's
our last question.
I mean, I think it's terrible advice. I mean, maybe if you were in dictatorship or stuck in a prison camp, and you really had to just say, life literally is hell, and I have no way to pursue any values of my own, and life really is literally suffering. Every day I'm trapped, I'm hurt, I'm beaten, I have no prospect of escape. And just as a matter of trying to retain some space, some inner room where you couldn't be hurt, you might think Stoicism.
Yeah.
You know? And they'll give you all sorts of techniques for doing that. But for Christ's sake, life isn't like that. I mean, I can imagine somebody being in a position in life where they kind of experience life like that. And then they would think, yeah, I need techniques for managing the pain because I can't make the pain go away. Just like, so I actually have like an ongoing pain, like physical pain that, I mean, this has been for 20 years, where it's sort of nonstop. And so there are things where if that really literally is the case, I think there's still more I can do about this, but you might just have to find ways to manage, you know. But I think life isn't like that. I don't think so.
Our
Not
last
metaphysically. Not metaphysically. In other words, life isn't like that by the nature of things. Life isn't like that. An individual's life might wind up like that. It could just out of happenstance or tragedy. But yeah.
Yeah, right. So what do you think is, so do you think that objectivists can learn something from Stoicism? Do you think there's value in studying the philosophy?
Oh, from studying. So certainly from studying it. I think part of what it helps you do is to, I think this is true of any philosophy. Like if somebody said, well, is there a value of studying Plato or studying Aristotle or Descartes? It's, but let's just keep to Stoicism for now. It helps you understand what a worldview really amounts to, what it means to have a worldview, like an interconnected, I don't mean you're studying Tim Ferriss, I mean that you're studying actual Greek philosophers who have systematic philosophy. You see how they fit, you see what their position is on fundamental issues, like this is the nature of the universe, it's governed by God or whatever. This is the human nature. You're a part or fragment of a whole that's made of God, in effect. And your mind is simply a part. It's trying to give you a perspective and an orientation in life and seeing how this relates to, so how should I live? And that teaches you something about philosophy, because it's another illustration of your acceptance of viewpoint, of philosophic positions on fundamental philosophic questions. It has real action guiding, action influencing effect. Because the Stoics, if they had a view that, no, you have free will, because they're determinists, right? So you don't have free will. I mean, they sort of think you do, but it doesn't make any sense. So it's, in effect, it's determinism, detachment, duty. Is the essence of this. And you can see how they can interconnect. Because determinism is, it's all fixed in advance, so don't complain about it. And it's all fixed in advance by God, so don't complain about it. That's impious and irrational. Which makes sense that you would detach from things that you lose and stuff, because that's meant to be, and not really a loss. And then, so how do you orient yourself in that world? Well, comply with what is, comply with what must be. And that's the sort of duty element of it. And it really helps to see different fundamentals lead to different action guiding principles for living. And you can see it in different systems. Like you read Plato and you say, his fundamentals are like this, and so he's telling you to live it like this. Aristotle's fundamentals are different. They're like this, and so he's telling you to live like this. Objectivism's fundamentals are different. I mean, its view is there's only nature. There's no God infusing anything. You have free will. So you have to choose to think, you have to choose to act, you have to choose to live in certain kinds of ways. And then that opens up, okay, so how do I live? And then its view is that the whole orientation is to focus on pursuing and achieving the values that actually sustain and advance your life. And that has political implications. So it's look at the fundamentals, what's the guidance flowing out of that? And that is really helpful to see different philosophies. You don't have to study every philosophy, but you study a few major philosophic systems and you start to see, yeah, that's valuable. That kind of perspective is valuable on philosophy. And because it pushes you to think, so what are my answers to the fundamental questions that these philosophers are grappling with? Like, you might not have thought much about those issues, but you probably hold a view. You could just grab any old person off the street who does never studied philosophy, can't spell philosophy, and you ask them, is there a God or not? And they'll have a viewpoint. I mean, largely just from what they pick up around them and what they're told and what the culture, what's dominant views in the culture, and they just sort of pick up that, and of course there's a God, or no, I don't think so, or, it's impossible to know. That's a philosophic position. One cannot establish the truth or falsity of that claim. That's a philosophic position that needs to be argued for and defended. But somebody would just bat that out, yeah, of course, it's possible to know. Really? Did you study that? Did you think about that? What's your argument? Oh, I don't know, So it's, but they'll hold the viewpoint. And you'll find that in a lot of things. You ask somebody, is this a just war or an unjust war? Take Ukraine and Russia. Is it unjust for Russia to do what they did, or is it just? And say, oh yeah, this is unjust, or whatever the answer is. What's justice? I don't know. It's not. It's justice is doing what's right. Okay, so justice is just the same as morality in general? Well, no. You know, they won't. They'll just swim. They'll just be swimming. They won't know. And it's not. That's not an insult on your common man, but it's many people's just position because they haven't turned themselves to philosophic thinking. But if you want to have true ideas rather than false ideas, because true ideas lead to good things and success, and false ideas lead to failure and frustration, you need to think this way. You need to start. One needs to think more about these kinds of questions. So on the one hand, you might say, well, isn't it? It's kind of good that people are looking back to philosophy, right, for some kind of guidance in life, and there are things to learn from looking at those philosophies. But from the objectivism's perspective, Stoicism is not. In effect, it's anti-value, malevolent universe, duty over life, retreat versus ambition, in effect, in its essentials.
Well, Aaron, I think we were able to cover the most relevant parts of the philosophy, and also something I think it's really important. We were able to make comparisons to objectivism, so all the viewers will be able to make at least some initial judgments and understand the main differences between these two different philosophical approaches. So thanks again for being here with us, and for all the viewers, we're gonna be making it available, the video with English audio, and another one with Portuguese audio or subtitles to be decided. So thanks again, Ricardo and Aro. So see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.